Well, hey everybody, Andy Kvernen here with another Cornerstone Connection daily devotional. Have you ever been called to something that felt really big? I can think of several instances in my life where stepping into something felt like it was insurmountable in many ways. I remember a moment when I was working on seminary and I was working full time and coaching my kids' football and doing all these things, and it just felt overwhelming thinking, how is this ever going to get completed? I think we all face things that God calls us to. I really did feel that God had called me to study in that way, but that feels somewhat insurmountable. And then there's this moment in the life of the nation of Israel where Joshua is leading them on the conquest that God had set them on. God said early in the book of Joshua, hey, I want you to go and I want you to take the land that I promised you. And there are all these nations there. I want you to drive them out. And we know that God did that righteously, justly, because these are nations that had completely rebelled against God and against his standards. They were doing all kinds of evil and treacherous things, and it was time for them to go. And God said, I want you to go in, I want you to drive out the nations, and I want you to take possession of that which I've promised you. And of course, Joshua does. He's a man of great faith. He demonstrated that as one of the 12 spies who went in at Kadesh Barnea and came back and said, hey, God can do this. And so Joshua was rewarded with a life beyond the 40 years of judgment. And he goes in and he leads the people. And they start kicking tail and taking names. They start doing all kinds of amazing things. But there comes a moment when they've largely been in the southern kingdom that they go to the north. And in the first episode of their encounter with their enemies in the north is this encounter in Joshua 11, where the king Jabin, a generic name for the king of that region, kind of like Pharaoh or Caesar, King Jabin comes and he approaches Joshua with 5 armies. He's mobilized. He's heard about what's been happening in the south, and he's alarmed. And so he gathers five armies together to join forces against Joshua and the people of God. And by human terms, by human standards, this was an insurmountable task. Joshua wouldn't have known how this is all going to turn out, except for this. This is what the Lord said to Joshua in Joshua 11, verse 6. It says, and the Lord said to Joshua, don't be afraid of them. For tomorrow at this time I will give over all of them slain to Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire. Joshua heard the word of the Lord. He looked at the armies, these 5 armies, and actually I was there with several of our people a few years ago in Israel, and I stood in that site of Hatzor, and you can envision these 5 armies up in the highlands with Joshua and his army approaching, and they had all the advantages. They had every reason to think that they were going to be victorious against Joshua and the people of Yahweh. And yet, God said, don't be afraid. I will deliver you. And so Joshua went in and he did what God called him to do. And it says, interestingly, God said, you shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire. Friends, that's exactly what Joshua did. And there was only one nation that Joshua and the people of God burned, and it was the nation, the city of Hatzor. And you can actually see the burn marks there today. It's one of the cool evidences of how archaeology confirms the biblical narrative. That happens over and over in Israel. But friends, Joshua trusted God for what he couldn't understand. What's God calling you to today that's difficult? What kind of 5 army experience are you having? I can think of all kinds of experiences that I've had in my life that have felt insurmountable. What's God calling you to? How does it feel like it's impossible? Friends, I want to take you to a verse just this morning that just this morning encouraged me greatly. And it's one you read in the Bible reading several weeks ago, perhaps, or at least a couple of weeks ago. But it was one that encouraged me today in particular, and I want to bring it to you. It says this in Deuteronomy 29:29. It says, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law. Friends, I think a lot of times we get concerned about the secret things. We wonder, God, how are you going to do this? How's this going to turn out? And our anxiety starts to build upon that which we don't know, that which we can't see. And yet what does God say through Moses here in Deuteronomy 29:29? He says, look, the secret things, they belong to our God. God owns the secret things. God possesses them. They're not for ours to know. But he says this, he says, but the things that are revealed, those belong to us and to our children forever. In other words, what God has revealed to us, God holds us accountable to. Did Joshua know what would happen with the 5 armies? Well, no, not especially not when he went and walked up to the armies, when he went up and walked up to Jabin and he saw their power. But here's what he knew. He knew that God said, don't be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I will give them over. I will give over all of them slain to Israel. That was God's promise. And so was Joshua accountable to what he didn't know? No. But he was accountable to what God had revealed. Friends, I don't know what 5 armies you're facing, but I do know that God calls us to be faithful to him no matter what. And so what has God revealed to you already? You can't know the outcome, but you can know what it means to walk with God. Walk with God today. Trust God. Now, the tragedy of the story of Hatzor is that Joshua and his people followed God and they conquered Hatzor and God was victorious. But later, in the time of the judges, in the time when people did what was right in their own eyes, Hatzor rose up again. And because the people were disobedient, Hatzor reigned or exerted its evil influence once more. Friends, we're called to remain vigilant in walking with the Lord and trusting him for the results. I just want to leave you with this today. In Deuteronomy 29:29, it says, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law. Friends, what has God revealed to you? He's revealed to you his word. Let's work in his grace and under his sovereignty to do all that which he's given us in his word and to trust him for the things that we cannot know. God bless you, friends. Have a great day. And Lord willing, we'll see you again soon on the Cornerstone Connection Daily Devotional.